With Israel as our focal point, here's the question. What is the difference between social justice and biblical justice? Welcome to the Can I Trust the Bible live stream. I am Raj Nair here in San Diego, joined by a dear friend of mine, Pastor Dumisani Washington. Dumisani, how are we doing, my brother?
Raj, how you doing, my brother? Good to see you. It's been a little while.
It's been a minute. It's been a minute. Now we're going to obviously
Yeah.
tackle some really spicy things today,
Yes,
and
sir.
it stems from what we see on college campuses. And for anyone who's watching, and this isn't to throw shade, but if you've maybe read a few articles and seen a couple documentaries and think that you understand the conflict, I'm almost certain that you do not. I've been there 30 times. I know Dumasani has been there a bunch of times. I think the most constructive way, and I'm still learning, and I think the most constructive way to understand what's happening is to hear perspectives, even perspectives that you might not agree with. When we bring people on these live streams, it's not that I or the channel necessarily endorse everything that is being said, but it's adding layers, it's adding context so that when you approach this very difficult subject, you're able to speak on it more educated, more holistically, more, with more discernment. And so really the only qualification for someone to come on this live stream is that we feel that they are truly governed by the Holy Spirit. It isn't politics first, it's the Holy Spirit allowing us to understand and dissect these very spicy subjects. So Dumasani, I know we have a lot to get to, and this is something you're very passionate about. But with Israel as our focal point, what is the difference, in your estimation, between social justice and biblical justice?
Well, Raj, social justice has more of a political connotation to it, right? Someone would even trace it back to some more of a Marxist theory type of stuff, right? In other words, it's more along the lines of the whole socialism, right? In other words, more of equality of outcomes, not so much equality of access, if you will. So it's not really concerned with what we know as biblical justice, right? The Hebrew word for justice is tzedek, which is righteousness, right? This is and God, one of his names is Jehovah Tzedekenu, right? The God, our righteousness, right? So pretty important word if he's going to call himself righteousness, right? And righteousness is more of God's word and his law, right, being established, right? If it wasn't for the blood of the lamb, none of us would be able to stand under his righteousness, obviously, right? So righteousness, justice is about, for example, in the scriptures, more of a Isaiah said in chapter 1, right? Rebuke the oppressor, those who are putting down those who are the weaker in society, whether that's the poor, the widow, or the orphan. He lists those things, right? But not in some sort of government heavy-handed way of now let me redistribute everything that Raj has to fix everything, because that doesn't fix anything, right? But it really is about people having the opportunity to live their lives and do freely, right? With access and all of those things. So that's the difference. God's mindset of justice, very different than the whole, what we understand to be social justice.
Hmm. Now, we're going to actually get to specifically what's happening on college campuses. And I know that you're very passionate about this. And I think one of the things that bothers me, or at least makes my antennas go up, is the selective outrage that I see. And here's the thing. When people point out what else is happening in the world, it doesn't excuse Israel. It doesn't mean that they're, perfect, or that there isn't a lot of things we could criticize Israel for.
Yes, sir.
But I do wonder, I was pretty intimately, I guess you could call it, present during the Syrian civil war. I went up to the Golan Heights and could see into Syria, and probably 8 to 10 times I heard bombs going off. I heard gunfire. I was right there. And then personally, I was part of a documentary team that was in the island of Lesbos in Greece, in Syrian refugee camps. It isn't something that's kind of distant for me that I'm just saying out of the blue, but I heard absolutely nothing about Bashar al-Assad, nothing about what Russia was doing there. No one cared at all on college campuses about, estimates have between 500, 600, maybe 800,000 civilians, people died in the Syrian civil war.
Yes, sir.
Nothing. And I know you're really passionate about what's happening to Christians in Africa. So can you illuminate for someone who might be like, wait, Christians in Africa, what are you talking about? Can you tell us what's going on with Boko Haram and Christians in places like Nigeria, and then contrast that to the outrage that we see being directed at Israel?
Raj, over the past about 20 years, give or take, some 50,000 Christians in Nigeria have been slaughtered. Over 50,000. That's just an estimate. That's just Nigeria. That doesn't mention Sudan, where there was a civil war for a very, very long time before North and South Sudan separated. Hundreds of thousands killed, millions displaced, right? That doesn't mention Mauritania. That doesn't mention some of the other regions that are happening, other things that are happening there in the region. Christians that are killed, displaced, or enslaved in much of these very, very heavy-handed Arab Islamic or Islamist countries, if you will, right? So the slavery thing is for real. Hundreds of thousands, if not more than that, right? And most of those people are usually Christians, and often they are Muslims. Raz, as you know, there are other Muslims that were being killed by those who are more radical, right? These things happen. They've been going on for decades. Christianity, as you know, Raj, is the number one most persecuted religion. Our Jewish brothers and sisters are the number one most persecuted ethnic group, if you will, right? Although Judaism also is a religion, but in terms of religion worldwide, Christians was just a few years ago, the stat was one Christian was killed every 5 minutes. I'm not sure what the stat is now, but we're living in the greatest time of Christian persecution since the history of the church 2,000 years ago, right? And you're right, Raj. This is happening in Africa, other parts of the Middle East, other parts of the world, not to mention the Christians like in China, Christians in Iran, where the church is growing the fastest is in Iran right now, right? Even in the midst of all the oppression, the Iranian people who generally love Israel, love the Jewish people, right? They have not succumbed to all the propaganda from the Ayatollah regime, and the church is growing miraculously there, right? So here's God doing what he's doing, and you're right, Raj, it's off of the radar of not just the college students, right? But the vast majority of the body, right? And again, like you said, not as a pastor, I talk to my fellow clergy, right? We are oblivious for the most part, right? And I had the opportunity for this as an issue to be introduced to me while I was in college, right? I was in the 1980s, Raj, when I first became aware of Christians in other parts of the world. One of my friends traveled to, I believe it was Nicolae Ceausescu was the dictator of Romania, if I'm not mistaken. He had just been killed, and my friend had gone on like a missions trip with some of his friends, right? And he came back, and he's like, Dumisani, I saw this, I saw that, and I had never heard of that, right? It was never on my radar, Christians in other parts of the world and what they were going through because they love God, because they love Jesus, because they're preaching the word. So for me, this was years before I was even involved in Israel advocacy or anything, right? So you're right, very passionate. You fast forward to today, and I'm hearing people attack Israel, right? And or ignore, like you said, Christians in Syria and Iraq. And yeah, I kind of stand up at that point, back gets a little straight, right? Because you're saying, okay, for decades, this has been going on, right? And unfortunately, now with this rise of anti-Semitism in the West like never before, there are even unfortunately, Christians who are also jumping on the anti-Israel bandwagon about Christians in Israel. As you know, Raj, Christians are free and growing, and that's the only place in the region where they are. But Christians virtually everywhere else are being persecuted, and it's amazing to see that discussion coming up now in that kind of distorted way.
When you look at what's happening on college campuses right now, what's your take?
So Raj, what's unfortunate about what's going on, and it's make no mistake, as you know, it's ugly, right? I mean, Jewish students being beat up, chased. It's like Jim Crow, Selma, Alabama. They can't access certain parts of the school, right? Or if they're Jewish, or even non-Jewish, they're pro-Israel, or they're with their Jewish friends, right? This is really, really bad. Our organization made a little video about a week ago comparing and contrasting what was going on in the real apartheid South Africa. Yeah.
And what is your organization?
Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel.
Sorry, go
And
ahead.
we were founded in 2013, and we've been kind of doing this work between the Black and Jewish community in Israel, Africa, right? And so this has been an emphasis of ours, even though we're not a Christian organization. Of course, I'm a pastor, and much of what we do is based in the biblical principles of understanding this. As you were saying, first the biblical, then we do the geopolitical, right? Those two things that has to become, one has to come before the other, meaning I have to understand biblically who I am as a believer, but then how does God speak to all of these other things that are going on? The campuses, Raj, which people have been warning about, and I'm not me, I'm talking about you, much smarter than me and much longer before me. They've been warning about what's going on the campuses for a very, very long time, right? And on campuses right now, we have this this marriage between this far left kind of communism mindset of death to America, destroying liberal democracy, right? That and this whole Islamist mindset. Once again, it's amazing. You're watching kids at this point go through mass conversions to Islam. They're actually bowing down and praying on their prayer rugs in Columbia, UCLA, University of Michigan. It's happening across the country, right? Which, if that was just a religious choice, that'd be one thing. We live in a free country. It's religious freedom, right? But these are in Hamas encampments who are celebrating the slaughter and the abduction of over 1,000 Israelis a few months ago. In the midst of all of that, you have on our campuses the kids who are pledging their loyalty to Hamas, declaring their hatred for Israel, some of them declaring their hatred for America, right? And those protests has spilled out in the streets of LA, of New York. And yes, we are, one professor said it this way. He said that our college campuses have become national security threats. And he was not joking, right?
Wow.
Because of the level of terrorist activity ideologically that's actually happening there.
Wow. That's terrifying. One of the pushbacks I hear, and I want you to address this, Dumisani, is,
yes, sir.
Well, now you're upset about what's happening on college campuses, but in a generation, you'll come to appreciate it. Like during the Vietnam War, maybe it turns out the students were right. During the Civil Rights Movement, maybe it turns out the students were right. And this is one of those same things. In a generation, we'll realize that these students were right. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I've heard that as well. It's interesting because there are a lot of parallels, right? You have the anti-war movements back in the late 60s, early 70s about Vietnam. And even to this day, later on, there was a horrific war, probably wasn't prosecuted well from the American side of it in terms of all things that are going on. And then the civil rights as well, right? You had students that were standing with their Black friends and fighting for civil rights, this type of thing. Yes, there are some of those parallels there when it comes to quote unquote speaking truth to power. However, this would be the equivalent of kids protesting in favor of the Nazis. And I'm not in other words, it would be like the Second World War is going on and you got student groups on campuses, with swastikas and how that's the difference. And why people think that I'm being stringent in saying that. Let me say to you, Hamas, as you already know, Raj, people listening, is a terrorist organization whose stated goal is A, the destruction of the state of Israel, and B, the destruction of Jews worldwide, right? That's the movement on campus. So the difference between what happened back in the 60s and the 70s and now is that this is a pro-jihad, pro-Hamas, pro-terrorism, and, by the way, very anti-America. Even for those who say, I don't care about the Middle East, I don't care about the whole Jewish homeland thing, right? If you care about America, they're burning American flags, they're waving ISIS flags, they're wearing Hezbollah flags. So in the interest of self-preservation, you might want to be concerned about what's going on because it's starting with Israel and the Jewish people. And then what starts with our Jewish brothers and sisters never ends with them, right? Which is why they're coming for America. They're coming for freedoms that are here. They're coming for freedoms of speech. They're coming for liberal democracies. What's happening on our campuses is the opposite of fights for freedom and justice. It's a clamoring for more despotism. We want communism, right? We want Islamism. That's what's actually happening. And people, they'd have to be able to see the difference, not just the aesthetic. Oh, it looks like a protest, right? From the 60s and 70s. They have to understand what are they actually it's almost comical. One of the young ladies in one of the schools, they were doing they had taken over one of the buildings, right? And she was reading the list of demand. She wanted them to bring them food. We're going, okay, wait a minute. So I'm trying to understand. You shut down everything, right? And you're demanding X, Y, and Z, and you want catered what? Uber Eats, right? So this is what we're talking about. We're saying that is the Western mindset of somehow I'm going to hashtag something. I'm going to yell and scream and burn a couple things. And that's my contribution to justice. As we tell an organization, real leaders do the work. That's not doing the work. That's you forming a temper tantrum while your parents pay $60,000 a year for you to go there. Right. That's what's happening with that.
Dumisani, I love your wisdom and your discernment and the way that you slice through things to reveal truth. And I think if someone's watching this and their defenses are up, they have, maybe they clicked on this basically to disprove everything that that we're talking about. I want to do something constructive, which is I want to help my friend who's watching here. Dumisani, how many times have you been to Israel? Do you have a count?
About 13 or 14, somewhere around there. Yes, sir.
So collectively, you and I have been there about 43 times, which is
Yes,
nuts.
sir.
So we're able to
Yes, sir.
speak at least a little bit.
Yes,
What would you say are some misconceptions about the state of Israel? And I'll tee you off for this one.
yes, sir.
Before you started doing what you're doing, and I'm doing what I'm doing here at TBN,
Yes, sir.
we actually worked for the same organization, and you and I kind of it was all you. I was just in your shadow. Created this initiative called the Mizrahi Project. Long story short, one of the things that really bothers me is when people say, well, Israel is just a bunch of white people. First off, even if it was so, but if you ever actually go to Israel, you'll realize, wait a second,
Right.
that narrative disappears real fast because here it is, more than 50% of Israeli Jews are descendant from North Africa and the Middle East, not Europe. So you'll go to, and some of them are Ethiopian. You'll go to Israel and be like, this looks like New York City. I mean, the diversity that you see everywhere. And I think also understanding that there used to be, hundreds of thousands of Jews in Iraq. And what was it, 90,000 Jews in Egypt.
Yes, sir.
And Morocco, Iran.
Yes, sir.
Where do they all go? And so for me, that's step one. You actually, I think you did a whole PragerU video about that. So what are some misconceptions about Israel? Again, not to quote unquote defend Israel, but to help people have context before they open their mouth, in the sense that make sure you at least have a baseline understanding so you're not being destructive with what you say.
Well, Raj, as you know, there's probably not many topics on which people are really ill-informed, but feel like they're very informed other than Israel, right? When it comes to Israel, the Jewish state, right? And as you just said right there, ethnic diversity, right? When you go in, not even so much the non-Jewish population, I guess some 100 nations are represented in this tiny nation, right? But you're absolutely right. You walk around the cities, you're walking around, whether it's Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, or whatever, and you see people who look like anybody else. You're walking around any other major city in the United States of America, right? And so that's the first thing that people would probably realize, that this whole, it's a white settler colonial, like you said, Roger, even if it was a white nation, so who cares, right? But the thing is that it's not, it's just a libel, once again, used against Israel, that inferring that somehow it's white and somehow these white people came and stole land from the indigenous Arabs. Nothing could be further from the truth, right? So you have this diverse group of people that are there. Yes, and Jews from Europe and Eastern and Western, as well as Latin America and everything, right? Who returned home to their land, along with the Jews who've been there the entire time, even after the Roman destruction of the temple, right? But then, Raj, also the misconceptions, religious freedom, right? Jews, Christians, Muslims, Druze, atheists, you name it, right? You have the freedom to worship very much like in the United States of America, right? And again, one of the things we've seen, particularly since October 7th and all the different propaganda that's popped up in the social media, unfortunately, even some Christians believe some of the propaganda. The Christians aren't free there. Christians can't worship. Christians aren't. And that's completely not true. Now is it not true? It's the fastest growing Christian population in that region. The church is growing fastest in Iran, but the Christian population outside of that is growing fastest in Israel, right? And there's freedom of worship that's there, right? So, and one last thing I would say, Raj, about it is about the healthy, thriving democracy that it is. It's no more, as you said, perfect government than anybody else's, right? It makes mistakes, right? All that kind of stuff, right? But it is a free and democratic society, right? So one of our friends, Michael Dixon, that stand with us, said the Israel likes democracy so much they've had like 5 elections in the past 2 years, everything and stuff. That's their tongue-in-cheek way of saying, yeah, it's been really difficult here. We've been going through a lot of political turmoil, if you will. But if you see all those protests in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, that's a pretty healthy democracy, my friend, because if it were a dictatorial regime, they tried protesting in Tehran. Look what happened to them, right? They tried protesting in some of the other nations. It doesn't last very long, right? Israel, they'll be out there camped out with their signs and, they don't like whoever they like. I don't like Bibi. I don't like whoever. That lets you know that the people have freedom. And the Israelis, as you know, Raj, will let you know what's on their mind. Yep. They're going to tell you, right? And they have the freedom to say that in that healthy democracy.
Okay, so usually, almost entirely on this channel, we really try, even though we're addressing spicy subjects that have political connotations, we try as much as we can to not the word isn't overtly political, but inflammatory or whatever it might be. We want, to basically help people have a comprehensive biblical worldview to address these very spicy subjects. But you mentioned something, and it's something that we have to address because it is so prominent and influential. You mentioned Christians that have publicly, I don't even know what the word is, made a stance against the Jewish state. Not to say that this person made a stance against them, but I know you have, I'm almost reluctant to ask this question, but I know you have opinions about what Candace Owens has said recently about Israel. Can you unpack that for us?
Sure. And we've addressed that as an organization. We've done that officially, right? As we'd have, I know you didn't mention this person, but we're on the same lines. Another Christian conservative, Tucker Carlson, right? We have addressed it because, and we don't try to be salacious either. We don't try to be, hey, let's just kind of be provocative, but we also try to deal with issues even if they're difficult, right? And one of those has been these very influential to the right Christian conservative voices, right? Self-proclaimed Christian, they'll say themselves, I'm a Christian, I'm concerned. When someone like a Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson use their huge platform of millions of people to bring awareness to something like Christian persecution, which we applaud, absolutely. I told you, I've been aware of that since the 80s, and then turn that awareness to Israel, and then give the impression that somehow Israel is persecuting Christians. Of course, Tucker Carlson had on a Arab pastor from Bethlehem, Arab Palestinian. And Raj, you've been to Bethlehem numerous amount of times. Many people, most, like you said, misconceptions. Most people would think that when you say Bethlehem, you're thinking about Israel. Like, yeah, biblically, that's where Jesus was born, yes, but it's ruled by the Palestinian Authority, as you know, right? And the Christian population there has dwindled, not because of Israel, but the opposite. Those people have tried to either go to Israel or somewhere else because they are being so persecuted. Same thing in Gaza, right? During the opening weeks of the war in Gaza, Israel hit a structure near an old church. Candace Owens and I hate to say this, I'm trying to burst people's bubbles. Even Charlie Kirk, they go on Twitter, hey, Israel's attacking Christians. We're like, you guys have to be way more responsible. If you're going to weigh in on this and not know what Israel is not attacking Christians in Gaza. It hit a structure that was near a church, right? But they hit that structure because Hamas uses those structures as well as churches, mosques, synagogues. I mean, synagogues aren't there anymore, but schools and everything to put weapons and store other fighters, and they do that on purpose. For us, Raj, as controversial as it was, we had to speak out about it, right? Because you have these people on their platforms saying what's just not true. It's not even so much this emotional, oh, we love Israel. It's not, you're not being honest about what's actually happening, right? On top of the fact that not only is Israel not attacking Christians, once again, you are purposefully not talking about Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, right? You're not talking about what's happening with the Christians there. Raj, if I can interject this, I've shared with pastors right after that incident. We have monthly meetings with Black pastors and Black leaders across the country as part of our organization to give this. Not exclusive, but people can come whoever they are, regardless of their ethnicity. But we deal with these themes as it pertains to the Black church and the Black community. And we were saying to them that one of the potential dangers is that the issue of Christian persecution, which is real, is being introduced to a younger generation who didn't know, but in a very warped, anti-Semitic way, right? So not only are they not aware of what's going on with Christians in Iran, they think they're going to, if they're just listening to these people like a Tucker or Candace, they might think that Christians are hunky-dory everywhere but for Israel, right? That somehow Christianity is just thriving. They have their brothers and sisters in Christ just singing worship songs, but Israel is somehow attacking Christians. The exact opposite of reality, Raj. And we feel that that's very dangerous because the word of God tells us in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 3, to remember those that are in chains as if bound with them. We have an obligation as believers to remember our believing brothers and sisters in parts of the world as if we're struggling with them. That's gaslighting to the highest degree to say, oh, yeah, well, Christians are fine in Iran. Don't worry about that. But Israel hates those Christians. So that's really dangerous.
That's so helpful, Dumisani. That's so helpful. I think that the thesis of this discussion is what is biblical justice? And there's one thing that we all want, right? That's justice for the Palestinians. But what, in your estimation, is like someone's watching this and they're mad, they're angry, they're upset, they're pissed off.
Yes, sir.
But I've never met this is a true story. I have never met a single Israeli who would tell you, I don't want justice for the Palestinians. I hate them. I mean, maybe you can meet someone who have some bitterness because, some of their friends have been killed. Maybe they've been stabbed themselves. But I don't find it to be a country that's bound by bitterness. That being said, I think we can all agree that, man, God willing, let us find biblical justice for the Palestinian cause.
Yes, sir.
What, in your estimation, is real justice for the Palestinians?
What's interesting to me, Raj, is that the Jewish state of Israel, I've heard several people say this, and it's so true. The freest Christians, Muslims, and Jews in the Middle East are in the Jewish state of Israel, right? You can be an Arab Muslim in the IDF. You can be a Supreme Court justice, right? You get virtually anywhere. And for me, justice looks like what we, at the end of the day, all want, regardless to our ethnic background, even our religious upbringing. And people want to have freedom, life for their families, right? You want your kids to go to school. You want them to be safe, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we all want the same short list of things. And the Arab Palestinians deserve that as much as anyone else, right? There are people in Gaza, in what is a completely war-torn country right now because of what happened on October 7th, or Arabs who are in different parts of the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, who want freedom for their families, right? I want my husband, my wife, my children, which we want to live our lives, right? Unfortunately for them, their leaders are the ones who stand in the way. Hamas is a terrorist organization worth billions of dollars. The top two leaders of Hamas are worth over $11 billion. None of them are tech moguls to my knowledge. So that money's coming from taxpayers, it's coming from these charitable organizations, everything, right? And they're taking that money for themselves. And the people in Gaza are largely poor, as you know, Raj. The living wages are very, very, very low. Healthcare, all these other types of things, they're struggling, right? And they're at a healthy dose of it's the Jews' fault, right? This is what's actually going on. Justice for me as a pastor looks like those Arab Palestinians, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in the West Bank, having the opportunity to live their lives in freedom, whether that was ultimately as a part of the Jewish state of Israel, like the 20% of the Arab population that's there now, right? Or in those territories in which they have leaders who care about them and their education and their lives and everything, right? And not just using them. I think about Dr. King's words, 1968, when he was asked about this same conflict, right? I'm going on 60 years ago, right? He said, peace for the Arab side of that world is an economic security. He said that they so desperately need, right? He said there should be a Marshall Plan where we lift up those who are at the bottom of the economic ladder, he said, I'm quoting, and bringing them into the mainstream of economic security. Sounds wonderful. Almost 60 years later, that's still not happened, right? What we do have is billions of dollars going to those regions, right? But they're being taken by Hamas. Where I come from, Roz, I come from the little bit of street in Stockton. We call those poverty pimps, right? In other words, I'm going to represent the poor people. Just give the money to me, right? You come check in on me about a year later. I got 3 Hummers, a caddy, and whatever else in a 10,000 square foot house. And the people that you were trying to help, they're still poor, right? Mm-hmm. And you come to me, hey, Dumisani, what's going on? Hey, man, bruh, I need some more money. I need you to, don't you care about these poor people? That's what's going on. Right?
I think that's a really important point. If you look at, the bank account of Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, or Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, or Yasser Arafat when he died, what do they find in his Swiss bank account when he died?
Billions, Rod. Billions, right? This is what's amazing. Again, this is one of the oldest games in the world. I won't use another example because I don't want to get too spicy. I'll follow your lead, but I'll just say this. One of the oldest games is then to speak on behalf of, the Bible has a lot to say about this in terms of justice. One of my favorite books, Raj, when it comes to this topic is the book of Nehemiah, right? Nehemiah, right? The cupbearer for Artaxerxes, the head of the Persian Empire. We know the story. He's released to go back to Jerusalem and oversee the reconstruction effort of the wall, right? Ezra, his counterpart, did the temple. This is the rebuilding, right? The Zionism reestablished for the Jewish people, right? Nehemiah, ladies and gentlemen, is 13 chapters long. By chapter 5, the wall is done. So where did those other 6 chapters come from? Nehemiah is addressing the issues of justice internally, right? He's dealt with Sanballat and Tobiah and all these other non-Jewish enemies of Israel. He's now dealing with corrupt priests, people who own the banks, who are foreclosing on their Jewish brothers and sisters who are poor. There's a class warfare going on that's all Jewish, right? And he's rebuking people. Hey, at one point he grabs guys' beards and he's old school, right? He's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And his point is, his passion, Raj, is coming for his love for God and his love for his Jewish brothers and sisters. He's going, yeah. He said they had to raise money and buy back Jewish slaves because what had happened is that the land, they had foreclosed and they took Raj and his wife's land and their kids as collateral. And Nehemiah's going, first of all, you can't do that in terms of the Torah. There's no way. Secondly, what's wrong with you guys? Here's my point. In the passion that you hear is that Nehemiah speaks truth to power. He's standing for biblical justice, even though he's Jewish and he's speaking like this to other Jewish leaders, right? And why is that so important? That's God's mindset. Nehemiah said, you are oppressing your own brother and sister. That is not what this is supposed to be. Judah is supposed to be for all of us in the land, and you can't take advantage that way. When I think about justice for the Arab Palestinians, that's where my mind goes to, right? They need leaders that will represent them, not the Yasser Arafats, not the Ismail Haniyehs and the rest of them, right? Who these guys were just fat cats making. Mahmoud Abbas is worth how many hundreds of millions of dollars, right? His house is in Judea and Samaria. Cost $13.1 million to build. You could see it almost from a satellite, right? These guys are wealthy and their people are struggling. And Raj, as you know, most people aren't aware of that. When they hear about the oppression of the Palestinian, boom, they blame Israel. Boom, the Jewish state. Boom, they're not even aware of all the money that has been taken from those people.
Wow, this has been unbelievably helpful. And we're obviously going to have you back, Pastor Dumisani, because I love you, one. Two, I can just tell the Holy Spirit is just, furious inside of you, getting out all this truth. And three, you're just fun to be around. But I want to end with this question,
Yes,
and then we'll wrap this up. Let's say someone is watching this that's at Columbia, they're at UCLA, they're at name the campus, and they're mad, but they're here and they're watching. Yeah. In closing, Dumisani, what would your message be to someone who has a very, very hostile view of the Jewish state?
Let me do it two ways. Number one, for those to whom that applies and they're Christians, first thing I would say to you as a pastor talking to other Christians, that you really pray, right? That you really seek God and his word and not be led astray from the other things that you're hearing. And from there, as you're praying, God will prepare your heart to hear from some other ones, to even receive other information. And for everyone else, young people, whether you're Christian, Jewish, or non-religious, whatever your faith may be, I can tell you once again as a Christian pastor that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Israel, is the God, the King of the universe, as our Jewish brothers and sisters say. And yes, Israel is his chosen. Absolutely. I'll make no apologies for that. That's what the word of God says. But he's a God who's concerned about you, me, and everyone, right? He's not a God who picks and chooses in terms of people that he loves and wants to show himself strong and mighty in their lives. So for you young people, I can only imagine. I have young people of your age, right? You're bombarded with so much stuff. There's so much that's coming at you that I want to encourage you that if you're willing to just pray, quiet yourself for a moment. I mean, find a place in your dorm, somewhere like that for a moment and really ask a simple thing. God, I really need you to help me. Show me what is truth. I guarantee you that he honors those types of prayers, right? In the midst of the chaos and the madness, he will get it to you. I'll say this one last thing again. The prayer part of it isn't so much him letting him know. He already knows you. It's you preparing your heart, because when he's dropping something on us, we got to be ready for it, right? You have a friend of yours goes, tell me the truth. And you say to yourself, I know my friend, and they don't want to really hear. So God is, yes, I want to give this to you, but I want you to be prepared. Young people, pray and ask God to help you see and even prepare you for it. I guarantee you he will answer that prayer.
Dumisani, I love you. I love your kids. I love your entire family. I love your wife. I love your grandbabies. You are a dear friend of mine. Thank you so very much for coming and giving us your wisdom.
Thank you, Raj. Thanks for having me, friend.
Hey, I'm Raj Nair. Thank you for watching the Can I Trust the Bible YouTube channel. We hope this video gave you compelling evidence to trust in the validity of the Bible. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. And ask your questions in the comments and share the video with your friends and skeptics. Thanks for watching. See you next time.